Most people trying to stop comparing themselves to others are solving the wrong problem. They're treating a symptom. The actual root, the thing driving the comparison reflex, even when you intellectually know it's irrational, is identity uncertainty, and no tip list touches it. That's what this video is about. In the next 12 minutes, I'll show you number one, why comparison is hardwired into your brain, and why willpower alone will never interrupt it. Number two, the ancient difference between Spardha and Matsarya, two types of comparison that feel identical from the inside but have completely opposite effects on you. Number three, a self inquiry practice that builds identity from the inside out so external metrics lose their grip. Let's get into it. A woman named Priya, a graphic designer in her early 30s, told me something I haven't forgotten. She said, I compare my deepest reality with the outward appearances. She knew it was irrational. She had already deleted Instagram twice. She had journaled about gratitude. She had read the books. And still, every time a colleague got promoted or a friend posted a vacation, something in her chest would tighten and she would spend the next 2 hours mentally cataloging everything she hadn't done yet. The comparison wasn't coming from laziness or insecurity in the shallow sense. It was coming from something she couldn't name. That nameless thing is what this entire video is built around. Here is something your brain is doing right now without your permission. Neuroscientists call it social rank processing. Your brain has a dedicated circuit built over millions of years of evolution that continuously scans your environment and asks, where do I stand relative to the people around me? This isn't a personality flaw, it's a survival architecture. In ancestral environments, your rank in the group determined your access to food, mates, and protection. Low rank meant real danger. The problem is that this ancient circuit cannot tell the difference between a rival in your tribe and a stranger's highlight reel on a screen. It processes both as real social data. So when you see someone else's success, your brain doesn't just observe it, it ranks you against it automatically before you have a single conscious thought. This is why the advice to just stop comparing yourself to others is almost useless. You're being told to override a reflex that operates below conscious thought. That's like telling someone to stop flinching when a ball flies at their face. The flinch happens before the decision. But here's where it gets interesting. Modern self determination theory, developed by psychologists Edward Dacey and Richard Ryan, found that when people have a strong internalized sense of who they are and what they value, the social comparison reflex doesn't disappear, but it loses most of its power. The ranking signal still fires, but it lands on solid ground instead of a void. When you don't know who you are, every external comparison feels like evidence about your worth. When you do know, it's just information. Prabhupada pointed at the same mechanism from a different angle. He taught that the tendency to measure yourself against others arises from a fundamental ignorance of your own nature, not ignorance in the sense of being uninformed. Ignorance in the sense of not having direct contact with what you actually are beneath the roles, the achievements, the failures. When that contact is missing, the mind reaches outward for a reference point. Other people become the measuring stick because you have no internal one. This is the root, not low self esteem, not social media, not a bad habit. Identity uncertainty. When you don't know your own nature with any clarity, comparison fills the vacuum. The practical takeaway here is a shift in diagnosis. The next time you catch yourself in a comparison spiral, don't ask, how do I stop this? Ask instead, what question is this comparison trying to answer? Almost always, the answer is some version of, am I enough? Am I on the right path? Do I matter? Those are identity questions, and a social media scroll will never answer them. Sanskrit has a precision that English doesn't when it comes to this territory. There are two distinct words for what we loosely call comparison or envy. Most people collapse them into one experience. They're not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously. The first word is Matsarya. It translates roughly as toxic envy or jealousy. It's the experience of seeing someone else's success and feeling diminished by it. Your friend gets the promotion, and your first internal move is to find a reason their success doesn't count, or to catalog everything you've done that they haven't, or to quietly hope they fail. One person in a common thread described it exactly. It eats me alive. In my head, I'm constantly battling people out, tearing them down, and it doesn't feel right. That's Matsarya. It's draining because it's fundamentally zero sum. Their gain registers as your loss. The second word is Spardha. It translates closer to healthy emulation or inspired striving. It's the experience of seeing someone else's success and feeling a pull toward your own potential. Not why them and not me, but if they can do that, what does that tell me about what's possible? Spada uses the other person as a mirror that reflects your own unlived capacity, not as a ruler that measures your inadequacy. From the outside, both can look identical. Someone hears their colleague got a raise and feels something activate in their chest. That feeling could be Matsarya or Spardha. The difference isn't in the trigger, it's in the direction the energy moves. Matsarya contracts inward into resentment. Spardha expands outward into motivation. Neuroscience has actually mapped something close to this distinction. Mirror neurons fire when you observe someone else doing something, and they fire in a way that simulates the experience in your own nervous system. That simulation can run two programs. If your identity is unclear and your sense of worth is externally anchored, the simulation triggers a threat response. Your brain reads another person's success as evidence of your own inadequacy. That's the neural substrate of Matsarya. But if your identity is internally grounded, the same mirror neuron activation runs a different program. It reads the other person's success as a proof of concept. It becomes aspirational data rather than threatening data. That's the neural substrate of Spardha. The question is, how do you shift from one to the other? You can't do it by deciding to. You can't do it by reminding yourself that comparison is the thief of joy. You do it by building the internal ground that changes what the comparison signal lands on. There's a practice from Vedic psychology called Pratipaksha Bhavana. It means deliberately cultivating the opposite thought, not suppressing the Matsarya response, not pretending it isn't there, but consciously introducing its opposite into the same mental space. When the contraction of envy fires, you ask, what would it feel like to genuinely want this for them, not because you're supposed to, as an experiment, as a deliberate installation of a different signal? This isn't toxic positivity, it's a rewiring technique. Over time, the brain begins to associate the comparison trigger with the Spada response rather than the Matsarya response. But it only works consistently when it's paired with something more fundamental, knowing who you actually are. There's a concept in Vedantic philosophy that most Western psychology doesn't have a clean equivalent for. It's the distinction between aham and atman. Aham is the ego self. It's the self that has a name, a job title, a list of achievements, a set of failures, a place in the social hierarchy. It's the self that compares, because comparison is how it knows it exists. It needs external reference points the way a shadow needs a light source. Atman is what witnesses the ego self. It's the awareness behind the thought, the observer that watches the comparing mind without being the comparing mind. It doesn't need a reference point because it isn't trying to prove anything. Modern mindfulness based cognitive therapy has a technique that maps almost exactly onto this. It's called decentering. Instead of trying to change the content of a thought, you change your relationship to it. You observe the thought from a step back. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm falling behind, not I am falling behind. The thought becomes an object of observation rather than the ground you're standing on. This is the practical bridge between Vedantic philosophy and contemporary psychology. The witness state, the Atman perspective, is accessible to anyone regardless of their beliefs. You don't need to accept any metaphysical claim. You just need to practice the shift from being the comparing mind to watching the comparing mind. But the witness state alone isn't enough to stop comparing yourself to others. Watching the comparison from a distance is useful. It interrupts the automatic spiral, but it doesn't fill the identity vacuum that creates the comparison hunger in the first place. For that, you need to build something. Here is a self inquiry practice drawn directly from this framework. It takes about 10 minutes. You need a piece of paper. At the top, write this question: what do I know to be true about myself that no external outcome could make false? Then write, don't filter. You're looking for qualities, not accomplishments. not I am successful or I have a good job. Those are aham statements. They're contingent on external validation. You're looking for something closer to I care deeply about the people I love. I don't quit when things are genuinely hard. I'm honest even when it costs me something. These are values based identity statements. They're not metrics. Nobody can rank you on them. They don't go up or down when someone else gets promoted. The research on this is consistent. People with what psychologists call a values based identity, an internal sense of self anchored in what they stand for rather than what they have achieved, show dramatically lower reactivity to social comparison triggers, not because the triggers stop, because the triggers land on something solid. Pru Bu Pa Du describe this as knowing one's own unique nature and purpose, not in a grand destiny flavored sense, in the practical sense of I know what I am, I know what I'm here to do, and someone else's path doesn't threaten that because it was never a competition. When you stop comparing yourself to others in the sustained way, not just for a day after watching a motivational video, it's almost always because you've built this internal ground. The comparison reflex still fires, but it arrives at a self that has its own coordinates, and it leaves without leaving damage. The practice. Once a week, sit with that question. What do I know to be true about myself that no external outcome could make false? Add to the list, refine it, treat it as a living document of who you actually are beneath the metrics. That list, that internal ground, is something most people have never been helped to build systematically. If you have tried the journaling, the social media breaks, the reframes, and you're still waking up with that tightening in your chest when someone else moves forward, the fastest way through this isn't another video. It's a conversation. I do free one on one calls, 15 to 30 minutes, no pitch, completely personal. You'll walk away with a clear picture of exactly where the identity uncertainty is coming from in your specific situation and what the actual next step is, whether we ever talk again or not. The link to book is in the description at dailymindreset.com to your consultation. Subscribe if you want more of this because the next few videos go even deeper into the practices that build this kind of internal ground. Tell me in the comments, when comparison hits you hardest, what question do you think it's actually trying to answer?